Hey, this is Becton Bodenheimer, and thank you for tuning in as we celebrate my grandfather's birthday on the Shadows podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Shadows podcast. I am your guest host for today's special episode. To introduce myself, I am the newest member of Tripp's team with the EPMEIC cadre. My name's Cameron Chilcote, and today we have another special guest, actually your host for the Shadows podcast, Tripp Bodenheimer. So everybody welcome in your actual host, Tripp Bodenheimer, for today's special episode. Sir, welcome in.
I appreciate it. Tell our listeners out there, what you did in the Air Force before you became one of us, before you became an instructor.
Okay. So yeah, absolutely. So I was a security forces member in the Air Force for about 6 years prior to transitioning over into the Airman Leadership School instructor realm, where I then got lucky enough and did a little bit of marketing to get myself over to EPMEIC, along with some awesome leadership that I had that supported me along the way. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to be with you on this team.
I appreciate you doing this. I appreciate you helping me out with this episode. This is one that I thought about for a while, and I was like, I don't know if I do this one solo, if I just do it like I did my episode 3, or if it's something to have somebody co-host. And today's actually our 100th episode under the Shadows umbrella, and that consists of the Rise from the Shadows episodes along with the Shadows. I know it can be a little confusing because you can see this is episode 87, but yeah, 100 episodes that we have put together and still put work into 100 different ones. And I just want to thank all of our listeners out there who have listened to any of them along the way and helped support the show in any way, shape, or form. I appreciate it.
Yeah, special shout out to the listeners of the Shadows. I started listening around July of last year is when I caught on. I went back and looked at my episodes prior to coming on this one to make sure that I was relevant with what we were talking about. And I was like, man, when did I start? So I went back and I actually had notes that I had been wanting to message you. It's funny. And I'll show you those at the end here.
Oh, nice. Yeah, because I remember we were in my office. You were like, yeah, Steve Gamlin. And you started naming off some people from previous ones. But no, that's cool. I appreciate you.
Heck yeah. Well, let's get rolling on today's special episode. So today we're featuring your father, Edward Charles Bodenheimer Jr. Yep. As we know, you're Tripp, you're the third. You said your dad went by Charlie?
Yeah, Charlie Bodenheimer.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about your dad up front, and then we can dive into what we're getting into today.
Yeah, kind of my dad's upbringing in a nutshell. Born June 30th, 1951, Red Springs, North Carolina. Give Red Springs a shout out here on the podcast. And he was the son of Edward Charles Bodenheimer Sr. and his mom, Doris. They worked at the Bodenheimer furniture store. And yeah, he had an older sister, my Aunt Ann, and who I loved her to death. One of the funniest people for me to talk to. Yeah, I grew up loving sports, loving Carolina basketball, football, pretty much anything North Carolina sports related. Loved his family more than anything in this world. If I could sum him up, best father ever, period.
Yeah, definitely. You unpacked a few things that we should jump in on. And foremost, you said that they had a furniture store that both your dad, okay. So how did the furniture store, the family history of the furniture store, did your dad in his upbringing, was he pushed toward inheriting that furniture store when he went the ROTC route? How was his upbringing?
You know, that's a really good question. I don't know if the furniture business was something he wanted to do long term. I really don't recall him talking about much of his aspirations that he had as a kid. I think he, in his mind, probably thought he was going to be starting center for the Washington Redskins, or perhaps thought he was going to play second base for the New York Yankees. But after, you ask about his upbringings. The furniture store, I really remember very vividly. Anytime I go out to Red Springs, I still take a picture of the side of it. You can still see Bodenheimer furniture painted on the side. But yeah, he, from all that I can take away from it with pictures and letters and notes and things that he's told me and things that I've heard from family members, they had a great life. They had a really good life living in Red Springs. And my grandmother, I mean, she was just absolutely beautiful. I remember the way my dad would talk about her and paint this picture of her with his words was absolutely incredible. I just wish I could have met her. Her hair, you know, he would say she had this really long hair that would go all the way down to her butt. But he adored his mom. He really did. And she passed away March 12th, 1963. She was working at the furniture store and she complained about having some headaches, and then she collapsed. They rushed her to the hospital, and unfortunately she passed away. And it really, I mean, rightfully so, came as a huge shock to my dad and my grandfather. And at that time, it was just two of them in the house. And I know they struggled. I read letters that my grandfather had written to my Aunt Ann, and he talked about how my dad was having a tough time with it. And I think that's something my dad struggled with his entire life. He talked about his mom a lot. We always had pictures of her around the house. And I remember him probably about 2 months before he passed away. We were sitting out on the trampoline in our backyard in Charleston. We were just kind of staring up at the stars, just he and I. I remember he started talking about his mom, and he was talking about how she loved Coca-Cola and how she loved I Love Lucy and her personality and how she'd have all her friends over in the afternoons and just hang out. All the ladies of the neighborhood come hang out with her. And he just really, he loved his mom to death. And I think he seeked my grandfather's approval. And I think that's something that drove him, both good and bad. And he, oh my gosh, his relationship with his sister, Aunt Ann, it was he loved her to death too. He always talks about her, and she had a oh my gosh, larger than life personality as well. And I remember her telling me this story about how she was going on a date. And my dad took a frog and put it in her pocketbook. And when she went on her date, I think she got in the car or something and realized and just completely freaked out. But yeah, he had a great childhood up until losing. Yeah, once his mom passed away, I think that really impacted him, and he struggled. He struggled keeping on some weight. And there's pretty funny story that I heard that I probably will withhold from the podcast, but it was what he did during the summer. Yeah, he struggled with losing his mom. That's something I don't think he ever really got over. And he was always getting in trouble. He had a Plymouth Roadrunner. Ooh. And and no Chevy Cruze, but he had a Plymouth Roadrunner. And from stories that I've gotten, like from George Hall, who was a friend of my dad and worked at the furniture store, and my cousin Ben, who, oh my gosh, we had the best talk the other day. Just, I think we talked like 3 hours just talking about my dad. My dad would get in trouble, and my grandfather would basically take the Roadrunner and store it. And that was his punishment, is he would take his car from him. Well, George told me when I had asked him for some information, he said that he would actually go and help my dad get the car out and drive it around for the night. And then he would put it back up, and my grandfather never found out about it. But my dad actually got a speeding ticket, a really bad speeding ticket, racing someone in the Roadrunner. And he had to end up selling the car to basically pay for the speed ticket. So he lost that, ended up getting a Gran Torino, and just loved that car. And then anybody I've ever talked to, they're like, American Pie by Don McLean was his song on 8-track in that Gran Torino. Yeah, and then he played sports growing up. played baseball, basketball, football. I mean, you look in the yearbook, he lettered in just about everything. But yeah, that was pretty much his childhood. Like I said, it was I mean, he did a lot. You look at his resume in terms of what he did in high school. I mean, he was very decorated, but I think internally, I think he was mourning a lot from the loss of his mom.
Yeah, and so with some of those points that you had picked out right there, you had mentioned that, you know, he loves cars and he also loves sports. So when he had bought that Roadrunner, how did he afford it at the time? Was he working? Was he working at the furniture store? What was happening?
That's a good question. I don't know. He may have been doing some little odds and end jobs around the furniture store, and somebody's going to tell me that I'm way off on this one, but I don't remember him ever telling me that he worked at like a McDonald's or anything like that.
Right.
So yeah, it's actually a really good question. Somebody out there has to know, but yeah, for all I know, his dad may have just got it for him.
If you're hearing this, help us out in determining, what all happened with the Roadrunner and
sweet rides.
Yeah. And how did he come into the Gran? What color was the Gran Torino? We got to.
Yeah, I'm missing. You're trying to fill some holes here that I don't have answers to.
Look, that's it.
Yeah. People help us out with these cars.
The colors will help determine a little bit more of his childhood personality. Did he have an orange or yellow Roadrunner, or what color? You know,
that's where you're going now. Okay.
Right. Yeah. So, no, fun stuff. You mentioned sports. Did you ever have your hands on any of his yearbooks?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I actually found a couple of his, I think it's the Red Mill was the Red Springs yearbooks, but yeah, I found some pretty sweet photos of him suiting up with the shoulder pads and his football uniform, number 51, played center. Baseball, very, very athletic, but very undersized too. I think I saw in high school that he was like, $160 for a center.
That was my next question for a center. How tall was he at that point?
He was pretty tall. He's like my height. So yeah, he claimed, I do remember this. If you were to talk to him, he was like, yeah, I'm like 5'10". He never sniffed 5'10". He was more like 5'7", 5'8". But
well, I mean, if he's your height, we know he was a mountain of a man. So
yes, broad. Yes. But yeah, I think he was like 5'7", 5'8". I think I remember my mom telling me, whenever he would be talking about his height. But I do the same thing. My Arizona license says I'm 5'9". I'm not 5'9", but
yikes. They just let you type anything in those.
Native Arizona thinks I am. So
that's it. So backtracking a bit more, you had mentioned his relationship with his mom. How was his relationship with his dad when his mom had passed away? What was that like for your dad?
Yeah, I know he adored his dad. I know, and look, I'll tell you, my grandfather, one of the finest men I've ever met in terms of just character and just work ethic and everything. And I loved him until the day he passed away. He was very upset, obviously, rightfully so, when my father passed away. But they had some ups and downs, just like any parents do. And it had to be hard on my dad, I know, and on my grandfather when that happened, because I mean, that's sudden. I couldn't imagine. I'm sure it was probably a little tumultuous at times, but at the same time, I know that anything he did and succeeded in, I can pretty much find a picture of my grandfather standing right next to him. So I know he was his biggest fan. I know he my dad strived to please my grandfather. Like, he wanted his approval a lot. And I know that's probably how he felt, because I do the same thing with my dad. I found myself doing something, even though he's not here. And I'm like, gosh, I wonder if he would approve of this. I wonder if he would, be proud of me for doing this. So yeah, I just based off what I've read and what I've heard talking to people and stuff. And because I really don't remember too much of the interactions, but I know that we always did Christmases and holidays and stuff together. So just like any parents, but had a great relationship.
Was that approval from his dad what led him into ROTC and a later career and future in the military, as well as?
I think so. I think so. My grandfather, very successful, had the furniture company. I mean, he was just doing great things. And Red Springs is a small town. And I think with my dad, I don't think he really knew what he wanted for a while. I think he went to Carolina. He went to North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He was there. I believe he started in 1970, but he went to Carolina, was at Carolina, was having a good time at Carolina. And he joined ROTC. And this was crazy because my cousin Ben told me when he joined and kind of put it into context for me. But 1970, that's when the Kent State massacre happened. That's at the height of Vietnam protest. I mean, it was not the easiest of times to go in there and say, like, yeah, you know what? I think this is something I'm interested in doing.
Right.
And so just, I would love to ask him now, like, what were you thinking at that time? Like, what made you do that? But yeah, he went to ROTC at Carolina. My grandfather had previously served as well, and he had been overseas. And I think my dad was just kind of wanting to follow in his footsteps. But I remember him telling me some stories about being on sea for as long as he was. And, just like he loved it. He loved it when I talked to him about it. Loves Top Gun. Top Gun was like his go-to movie. That kind of the nostalgia piece kind of made me think now with, the second one just being released, like, what would he think of this one?
And right around this time for this episode too.
And right around the time for this episode. Yeah, that's crazy. But yeah, he loved Top Gun. I still remember that. But yeah, he loved his time in the Navy, and then he finished up and served his time, and then was like, boom, Campbell Law School. And that's another one too. Like, well, I wonder, gosh, if he was a guest on here, I would be asking him, like, what do you think it was? Where was that turning point where you decided you want to go towards practicing law? And Campbell Law School, I think, was established in like 1976. So he was the class of 1980. So he was in I don't think he was in the charter class. I think he was maybe that second or third one, but got there. And then apparently that was like his thing. He found his calling card with practicing law, and he passed the bar the first time, which is extremely hard.
That's impressive, right?
Yeah, passed it the first time, and partnered up with Hugh Rogers, who I don't know if Hugh is still practicing. I know he was in Lumberton for. Hugh Rogers was actually the defense attorney for Demery and Green when Jordan's father was murdered. But those two had Barbara Colley, who it's kind of funny. I still talk to Barbara on Facebook. When I get to hear all kinds of stuff about my dad, and I love hearing from her. And she worked there with him, and she told me that like his very first case, it was a rape case. And she said he walked in, he started walking up the steps, and she heard the door close, and she said she was excited because it was their first verdict that they had on one of his cases. So she runs over to the steps, and he's kind of moping as he walks up the steps, and she's like, "What happened?" He said, "Not guilty." And she's like, "That's great. That's good news." And he was like, "What if I let a guilty man walk free?" And I think that story said a lot to me about, he wasn't just this guy who was a defense attorney who was going to be a slime ball. And, because defense attorneys kind of get a bad rap, and they hear that story and see that, like his conscience was really weighing on him. And then there was another one where she said that this guy was just really bad person, done some really bad things. And she questioned him. She's like, "Why are you even defending this guy?" And he's like, "Everybody deserves a fair trial."
They do.
They had their law office, and across the street was a guy named Doug Murray's office, and my mom was a paralegal over there. And I could be wrong, but what I think happened was I think that he had called her. He called over there. They started talking. The windows were across from each other, so they could actually see what one another were doing. Barbara told me stories about how my dad would look over there, just trying to get a glimpse of her. And I think he would go over to Doug Murray's office, and my mom says he would find excuses to go over there. And I think he asked her out to lunch. She couldn't do lunch, so I think they did dinner or vice versa. But I think he took her out to lunch, and then he asked her to do dinner, and it was he was pretty much, in love with her from the start. And she tells me stories about how he would jump on Cadillacs and tell her he loved her so everybody could hear it. And even when he proposed to her, it was in St. Paul, North Carolina, this restaurant. I can't think of the name of it. But he took her out there, and he stood on the table and proposed. And she's like, "Charlie, get off the table." He was like, "Well, when you say yes, I'll get off the table." And she said, after that first date, they pretty much saw each other every single day after that, for the rest of his life. And he adored my mom, loved my mom to death. Anybody you ask, they pretty much say, gosh, he just revered your mom, worshiped the ground she walked on. And I know he did. And I've always said, if I could have half the marriage that he had with my mom, then I'm doing good. I'm having a successful one. But yeah, he absolutely loved my mom.
Yeah. And with that, what memories do you have growing up with your mom and your dad and that relationship there?
My mom was a disciplinarian. Without a shadow of a doubt. She was the disciplinarian.
Nice pun right there.
Yes. She was the one where, so if I had a bad grade, like I remember when we were living in Charleston, I got a bad grade on something. And I walked in the living room, and I kind of looked around the corner, and my mom was back in the bedroom watching something. We had this long hallway that went down to her bedroom, and my dad was sitting on the recliner, and I was like, I got two options. I take this to my mom and I get a tongue lashing, or I give it to my dad and I get this is a learning moment. So I took it to my dad, and my dad was like, I'm going to sign this, but I'm going to tell you something. You got to get better at this. Next time, I'm not signing. She's signing. And that's all I needed to know. I was like, okay, I used my get out of jail free card. But no, we traveled a lot. We went to a lot of vacations. I remember we'd go to the mountains of North Carolina, Disney. We'd go to Disney a lot. I told the story on one of my previous podcasts, but I loved Figment, the little purple. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
All right. So Figment was like one of my go-to Disney characters as like an 8-year-old. And I had the hat with the autographs of the Disney characters. I could not find Figment anywhere. So my dad goes up to this worker at Disney and was like, my son really, really wants the signature. And they talked for a minute, and the guy walks behind the character fence and comes back 5 minutes later with my hat, and it's got Figment's signature on it. And I thought it was the coolest thing in the world that this little purple dinosaur had signed my hat. I'm sure my dad was like, look, man, go behind the fence, sign Figment, and make my son happy, all right? Because the amount of joy my dad had on his face when he saw how happy I was, he was a superhero to me. I was like, oh, he did that for me. This is so cool. But yeah, he coached my baseball, coached my football. He was very hard on me in baseball specifically. I remember I didn't even want to play for him at one point because he was so hard on me. Different person on the field than he was. Competitor version of my dad and dad version of my dad were completely different. But yeah, we had our Friday night traditions. We would go and get Chinese food at the Golden Dragon in Lumberton and go by Blockbuster and then go to the grocery store. And I look forward to that all the time. And he would he was like a kid at heart in a way. And he had the ability to just, I think my cousin Ben summed it up best, to just be eye level with a child. And meaning he can go in a courtroom, beat down another attorney, but then he could go home and he would, he'd go out to my room and play action figures with me or play Nintendo. He got me some Nintendo games, I think, for my birthday. And I came home from school and he's playing them. It's like, when did we get these games? He's like, they're for your birthday, but I gotta make sure they work. And he's playing these games.
Do you remember what they were?
I think it was like RBI baseball. It was probably like wrestling challenge or something. But yeah, like Nancy Honeycutt, who was a really good family friend of us, her and I think Ellen McLean, I think it was two of them. There was like this little triangle between the three of them of playing Zelda when Zelda came out. And this is before you can go on the internet and get codes and all this, but they would call each other like throughout the night, trying to figure out how to navigate through the game of Zelda. And I remember going to bed, and I remember my dad sitting on the floor playing Zelda at like 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. And it's crazy because now I'm like, gosh, he was 40 years old doing that. And now I find myself doing the same thing. But yeah, I remember that, and just how he was with my nephew, Jonathan. Like he would, always get down to his level and play with him. He was only like a year old, I think, when my dad passed, but I really remember that a lot in Charleston. And even Christmas mornings. Oh my gosh, Christmas mornings. My parents were amazing. They were amazing at Christmas. They really were. And I remember he would go up in my room and just play with all my toys with me. And then he would go to my sister's room, and he had no shame. He would play with her toys with her. And which it really made me feel good when I talked to my cousin Ben, and he was like, yeah, your dad would come home from college at Carolina and play with paper dolls with my cousin Doris. So yeah, just hearing little things like that and remembering that. I'm very intentional on doing that with Becton as well. I go in Becton's room, and whatever it is she's doing, or if there's a video game she's playing, she's trying to navigate through Breath of the Wild right now. And
fun game too.
It is
huge game. Large map.
It is testing her patience with a lot of things.
That's it.
But yeah, she'll come in and get really excited, and I'll sit down, and she couldn't beat somebody. I can't remember what level it was a while back, and she'd been trying to do it all day, and she was just defeated when I got home from work. And I went and sat on the couch, and she ended up beating him in like 2 attempts. And then she told me I couldn't move off the couch anymore. But no, I see a lot of her in him, and I just think it's so many good memories. And North Carolina games. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about that. We would go to Tar Heel basketball and football games, and one reason my dad was just the best is because he would, and this is a North Carolina thing. If you're not in North Carolina, you probably won't get this. But Fridays of the ACC tournament, Tripp Bodenheimer was sick. The Thursday, Friday of the NCAA tournament, Tripp Bodenheimer was sick. Every year this bug got me, and I had to stay home for those.
He would write that doctor's note and say, Tripp Bodenheimer sick.
I had to, and it just so happened that there were games on TV. But yeah, I remember, and even, up until, he passed away. I remember staying home from school, the ACC tournament, the NCAA tournament, and watching basketball with him. And I've never seen anybody lose their cool as quick as when a North Carolina game comes on. Another funny story about Carolina is 1993 ACC tournament. I just remember this because it was in Charleston. We only lived there 1 year. Susan and Reed Caldwell came down with Matt, Will, Katie, with their kids. They're my family. They're all of them. Susan and Reed are my parents as well. And they come down to visit for the ACC tournament, and we have this huge thunderstorm that comes through, and the power was taken out of our house. It was just, it was no power. My mom told the story about how this tree like fell down on the road when they were driving, and we had to go get kerosene from the gas station, and the line was really long, and it was freezing cold. We had all this rain, and Reed and my dad stayed in the car listening to, I think it was North Carolina and Virginia. And Will and I were standing outside getting kerosene. And still to this day, we talk about that story. But yeah, loved him some Tar Heels. But yeah, it was, Carolina was a huge part of my upbringing too, watching that with him, going to games.
And a lot of the points that you had mentioned is a side that you wouldn't think of a defense attorney going home at night and playing with dolls and playing Nintendo. You what you see on TV isn't necessarily what you get. You got
yourself too serious.
Yeah, you came home and you had a father. You had a father who could sit down and have fun with his kids, and that's the goal.
Yeah, my sister had we had an intercom system in our house in Charleston, and she would give him this list of like morning announcements. And he was the principal of her school, and he would get on there, and she had the chalkboard and her stuffed animals with the students, but he would get on there and make morning announcements. And then if she had a troubled student, she would bring them down there, and I remember he would have his yellow legal pad and he'd be working on stuff. But when she would come in there, I still remember he would be really deep in, that fifth gear working on his stuff. And then she would come over and say, "Oh my gosh, such and such just got in trouble for yelling at another student." And he would actually put his stuff down and go like, "Well, let's go deal with this." And he never was like, "Just get out of here, I'm busy." Never did that. He always, always, always put us first. And I that's something I still try to carry with me to this day, is that, dang, even when, things weren't the greatest for him, I never knew it, because he was still the best dad in the world.
And role model too, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So how else would you see that your dad influenced you in your choices now where you are today?
For the longest time, I was chasing, trying to measure up to him. I was trying to chase that. I was like, gosh, he went to Carolina, I didn't. He was in the military, I wasn't. He had a successful law firm. For the longest time, I didn't have that. And, I used to sit there and think, I didn't go this route in my life because, 10th grade, I lose my sister going into 11th grade. And I just lost my father 5 years previous. And, for the longest time, I felt like that was an excuse that I was just saying to myself to kind of mask any failures that I had. And, but I got to remind myself, he had a loss as well, a huge loss in his life when he was at a young age. We were nearly the same age when we lost our parent. But he still overcame all that. And he found his calling card, which was being an attorney. For me, it took me a little bit longer, but I joined the military. So I kind of followed the same path as him. I joined the military. And then from there, I found my calling card with teaching. I think that's the one thing that I'm just like, I'm so passionate about it. And it's something I love doing. And I think once I stopped trying to go down the same road as him, I almost ended up there. And I think, and then being a good dad to Becton, I'm not gonna sit here and toot my horn and say I'm the best instructor or that I'm the best master sergeant in the Air Force or the best podcast host. But I'll say when it comes to being a parent, challenge me. And that's something I think I picked up from him.
And it sounds like he's inspired you in a lot of different ways too. Just, career path, your hard work, your work ethic, being able to separate being a father and being a master sergeant in the Air Force.
Yeah.
Sounds like all of those are life lessons in which he definitely taught you.
That was a good point about the master sergeant thing, because even like now, like I know you know, like the amount of work that we have behind the scenes of teaching, and especially this time of year with summer, with conferences and summits and all this stuff going on. It would be so understandable for me to be like, Teresa, Becton, tonight I need to work on all this stuff. But I still have learned that can wait. Becton can't. That can wait. Teresa can't. I need to spend time with them and not be glued to my computer or my phone or whatever. Even with the podcast, I put the podcast on hold after a set time. I'm like, I'm done with it. I'll email people tomorrow. But yeah, I definitely think I picked up on that from him.
And has your mom ever compared your personalities and traits aloud to you between your dad and yourself?
Oh, yeah.
So what has she said?
Yeah, she has. And then others as well. I think the biggest things are charisma, which, I mean, being an attorney, like you got to have that charisma. He would actually do things like he would study little tactics that other attorneys that he was going up against did, and he would almost like play that to his advantage.
Witty.
Yeah. Very witty with that. And then wittiness. Oh my gosh. The ability to come up with little one-liners on the spot or comments. I have that, but Becton is, oh my gosh, she is incredible with it. You saw the video. She jumped on a bike at Walmart and started pedaling and couldn't go anywhere. And she's like, do you want to play a game? I'm like, what? What?
And it sounded like Saw. It was great.
It was funny because she was struggling to ride the bike for one. But I mean,
and I heard it firsthand with Barton too. That was
yeah. Oh yeah, you saw it. She walked up to Barton and just met him, and he said something to her, and she snapped one right back at him, and he was just like, "What?"
He was caught off guard.
Yeah, but no, I think the wittiness, the having a big heart. Both of us have had such a big heart that it's actually like burned us at times. But yeah, and just I think with a lot of the things that I even catch myself sitting in a certain position, and then I'll look at a photo of him and I'm like, oh, he's set this exact same way. So it's cool to see that. Yeah,
definitely. And I mean, just looking back at pictures of what your dad's done, cool memories. One thing that I would say is maybe for the listeners and myself included to have a better picture of your dad, creating a collage for us.
So I have a reel if you go to my Instagram page.
I saw it.
Yes.
So just plugging that out there for your listeners and everybody to see it too. And one other question that I had for you was if you could sum up your dad in a catchphrase or a one-liner, how would you sum up your dad?
One line, best dad ever, period. My dad, he wanted the world. He wanted to be the best attorney. He wanted the best lifestyle. He wanted to provide the most for his family. And he did. He wanted to, I think the two flaws that my dad had were he was constantly like seeking that approval, feeling like he had to do more. And then two, he just made some bad choices, but we all have. He made some bad investment opportunities. He made some bad choices that I think I know that if he were to go back and be able to repeat all that, I think he would have slowed down. And like Ben was telling me the other day was, he said, if he would have focused on being defense attorney, he would have been one of the best in the Southeast. I look back and I'm like, I had him for 11 years. And like I said, episode 3, I had him for 11 years. And a lot of people were like, oh, I'm so sorry you only had him for 11. But that 11, I'm blessed to have had. I wouldn't trade him. I'm here today because of those 11 years that I had with him. I'm here today because of talks that he gave me sitting on the steps at our house in Charleston that I still remember. So his legacy, we last talked to each other the 23rd of June, 1993. And I still hear his voice. I can still, hear him cough. I can still hear him laugh. I can still hear his, him say certain things. And just thinking about it, it's nearly been 30 years, and I still can picture it like it was yesterday. And I carried so many of those tools. There's people that we all interact with day in and day out that we label them as toxic, or we label them as poor leadership or laissez-faire or whatever. And you walk away from them, and you don't have 5-10 years from now, you have zero takeaways other than just, they were a jerk, or, even great people. But the fact that here we are 30 years later, and almost every aspect of my life is impacted by him in some way, shape, or form, with teaching, mentoring others, being a father, being a husband. His presence is all around me with every single thing that I do still to this day. Even this podcast has his fingerprints all over it. So yeah, I think that's very, you asked what time it was, and I told you how to build the clock, but yeah, I think that's it. I think the biggest thing is just his presence is still here with me from everything that I do.
And if you could remember that day in 1993, what were you doing at the time when you had heard the news?
Yeah, I was actually in the house. I was upstairs with my sister. We had like this game room. We were up there. And the last conversation I had with him was I walked by him. I think I was getting scissors or something. I was getting something from downstairs. And my mom was in the bedroom. My dad was on the recliner. I still have that recliner, by the way. It's in my bedroom. But I remember he was sitting on the recliner, and they were about to watch, I think they had recorded their soap operas. They didn't have DVR or nothing like that. They had to record it during the day. So they were about to watch that. And I walked by him, and that's when he grabbed me on the arm, and he's like, "Hey, if anything ever happens to me, just know that, I want you to take care of your mom and Myers and Kelly." And I'm like, "Gotcha." And he's like, "All right, I love you." And I said, "Love you too." And he gave me a kiss, and I was like, "Okay, all right, let me go back upstairs." And then probably about 30 minutes later, he had his heart attack. And yeah, I remember that day. It was just a blur. It was a huge blur. I remember walking down. I remember hearing the noise. It sounded like pots and pans had banged or something. And Myers went downstairs, and I'm like, no, don't go check. Just come back over here. And she went down the stairs and checked and looked around over to her left, and she saw my dad there. And he'd sit on the recliner with my dog, Mikey, and he just, I guess, felt it coming, pushed Mikey up, stood up, called my mom's name out, and he fell. And I remember the EMTs coming. I remember sitting in the bedroom with my sister, and I was just like, what is going on? Like, this is like, my life's changed forever at this point. The next morning I woke up, I remember waking up, and I remember thinking, like, this has got to be a dream. But I remember we slept in my parents' bedroom, which, I never really did that. I remember I woke up, and I think it was just Myers, and I think my sister Kelly had driven down and came and got us. But I remember going to the hospital and seeing them, and I ended up going and staying with my sister in Bladenboro for the remaining days that he was in the hospital. And it was bad. He had a really bad heart attack. And I remember my mom coming and picking me up and letting me know. I remember getting in the car and her telling me what had happened. But yeah.
What a powerful story too. And for him to reach out and tell you, that if anything ever happens to me, just know that I love you. I mean, that's a testament to his character.
I think he knew he was sick, though. I did. I mean, especially the older I've gotten, I think he knew his health wasn't the best. And there were things I talked about in that episode where I was talking about how, I would catch him breathing in a bag, and it just, for a long time, I beat myself up over that. But I knew he wouldn't want me to do that. He would have told me now if I were to talk to him. He's like, look, I told you that because I was trying to, protect your mom. I didn't want your mom to freak out. So I know he had his reasons for it, but yeah.
Right. And the whole time you were talking about, that one-liner, best dad ever, the one thing that I could think of was a coffee mug that said #1 dad, or a shirt. I don't know if you've seen the new shirts from Top Gun that have the Top Gun logo style.
I have, yeah.
That say Top Dad.
You have that.
My wife bought me that.
Yeah, I was like, you have one of those.
It's funny because when I was thinking of it, you said your dad is one, he was a Top Gun fan. Yep. And two, you said he's one-liner, the best dad ever. Who better to have a Top Dad shirt than your father?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He would have rocked that thing.
I'm sorry?
He would have rocked that. He would have worn it.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that's what I was thinking the entire time. But, I mean, do you have any final parting shots that you want to leave your listeners with to sum up this special episode for us?
No, I want to thank you for doing this. This wasn't like I asked you just to jump on a co-host. But this is probably the most nervous I ever was before an episode. And I mean, I'm not trying to sound braggadocious, but we've had some incredible guests on the Shadows for the past 100. I mean, we've had awesome people that I'd like pinch myself talking to. And this was definitely the most nervous I ever was, getting on and hitting the record button. It's something that I wanted to do this when I started the podcast 2 years ago. I kind of did the math and I kind of added up this date, and I was like, ooh, I could drop that special episode right. So this is something I've been planning for like 2 years, is get on here and just, letting people know about him. And so I can't thank you enough for doing it. Once again, like, to all of our listeners, thank you so much. Got some pretty cool news coming down, which, I kind of spoiled it and told you about that earlier, but not going to tell everybody just yet because I got to get it finalized. But keep your eyes and ears open, especially on the social media pages for some upcoming stuff. But yeah, if everybody could just take a minute, especially if you interacted with my dad, send me a message and tell me, like, something that you remember most about him, and give him some love today. And for those who knew nothing about him, thank y'all for taking time out of your day to hear just a couple of moments about trying my best to chronicle my dad's incredible 42 years that he lived into this 1 hour episode. Can't thank y'all enough, and hopefully you got something away from it.
And this was special too, especially your friends, your family, your dad's friends, coworkers. Yeah. Everybody that knew him are hopefully going to be tuning in and listening to this and jogging those memories of your dad to give you maybe something that you haven't had yet. So definitely, I thank you for letting me be a special part of this special day for you and the Shadows podcast together. So thank you again for this. This has been fun, learning about your dad, learning about where you've come from and your tendencies, and what your dad has taught you has been special for me. And I'm sure it'll be special for your listeners.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Absolutely. But that'll be all. That's all that we have here.
Yeah. Tell them see you next week on the Shadows podcast.
And we'll see you next week on the Shadows podcast.